All right. This is a natural following of the previous session because now we want to know how to protect our XData applications and make sure all the servers you saw here, the endpoints are public. If you put your server in the internet, anyone can invoke those endpoints and do whatever they want with your server as long as they know the endpoints. And they will because you have Swagger UI. And so now you have to see how to protect the applications. So it's a good question. I will answer your questions along the way, especially because I think it's a good way to show what Sphinx adds for you in addition to what you have in your XData server. And I'm thinking about what to approach before. But okay, let's go to the theory and then we go back later. We go back to the code. This session is about single sign-on with XData, but it will also show the same concepts for not having necessarily a single sign-on. What is single sign-on? Is an authentication scheme that allows a user to log in with a single ID to any of several related yet independent software systems. So translating this, it means that you have application A and you log to your application A. It's a normal login. But a single login is when you log to a central server or whatever, and after that login, you have access to many applications. All right? That's a single login. And Sphinx allows you to do that, a normal login or a single login. And this authentication and authorization process is actually might be rather complicated and convoluted, and especially because it involves security, and one golden rule of security that you should not try to reinvent the wheel, because encryption, that's true for encryption and protection and security, because it's very easy for you to forget something and have your application having security issues. And so that's why it's usually not recommended that you try to implement. We all are developers, and especially in the past, I think all of us, including myself, of course, try to secure applications doing it ourselves. Okay, let's save this password here. Let me encrypt it this way. Let me change the bytes of the file so I think it's encrypted and things like that. And it's very easy to overlook something and just have everything not protected. As they say, it's like where you have super, ultra, mega secure lock in a door made of a card box, for example. So you protect lots of parts, but if you have one weak part in all this encryption or authentication process, it doesn't matter, you have a hole in your application. So OAuth, which is a short for Open Authorization, is a standard that specifies a workflow for authorization and authentication kind of applications. All right? Who here knows about OAuth? What? Have you heard about it, or have you worked with it, or know how it works? Who know how it works? Okay. When you go to that process of login with Google or login with Facebook, or you want to give access to an application for your Dropbox files or things like that, all that process is done through a standard way, which is OAuth. All right? That's what it is for. Here is a link for the specification itself. It's rather very technical. And a good learning resource about it is OAuth.com, which is not an official, I think, website, but it's done by a company, but it's very good learning resources about it. And I'm saying this because OAuth, TMS Sphinx, uses OAuth as well. So you have all this standard in your login. Just a little bit of history. OAuth was created because in the past, how would you integrate systems? I'm sure many of you have used it this way. In the past, for example, you wanted to access some APIs. I don't remember the service that you had at that time, but suppose, for example, that you had a Dropbox service kind of in the past, and you want some application to have access to your Dropbox files, for example. You had to give your Dropbox username and password to that application in the past. This application has this feature, okay, I can connect to Dropbox account. In the configuration, give me your Dropbox username and password, and I connect to Dropbox. That's what it was before. And that's a problem because first, you give your username and password, which is a little bit dangerous, and that application will have access to everything in your Dropbox, not only all your files, but also the ability to delete files or even delete your account. If Dropbox had that option for you, you can just log in and okay, close my account. So that was a security problem, and that was OAuth came to solve. So it's a way for you to give access to another application without having to give the username and password. Instead, if Dropbox implements OAuth, then Dropbox will allow you to connect to them, your application to connect to them, without needing to give the username and password. Instead, you use this OAuth flow to go to Dropbox and say, you will log into Dropbox and say, give this application access only to view pictures and only in this folder and things like that. All right? So that's why OAuth came to solve. And it's not my intention to enter into details of OAuth. It's kind of complex. I took some time to get all this, its variations, etc. And so there will be no time to enter into details here. But mostly the flow is something like this. As I said here, you have your client application, which is not you. You have three entities in this OAuth flow. You have you, the user, the person. You have what you call resource server, which is the Dropbox. Is that what I want to give access. And then you have the application, which is going to access your stuff. Application is going to access your stuff somewhere, and you give that access. All right. So I'm here. Somewhere is Dropbox, is the resource server, and the client application, which is going to access the data on your behalf. So you have the client. The process is the client asks for you access to Dropbox. And then you say to the client, okay, let me authenticate. So the client redirects you to some service that authenticates you. Google, for example, log in with Google, or Dropbox itself. All right? Once you log in, it goes back to the server and say, okay, what do you want to access? After that, in the process, the server gives you the client application a token. So, as I said, a concept, but in the end, you don't give the application your username and password. Instead, someone gives the application a token to access Dropbox for you. That token is limited to what you allow it Dropbox to do. Only use these photos and things like that. Okay. So in the end, what matters here is in the end, client will access Dropbox. It has to authenticate to Dropbox, but instead of using your username and password, it's using a token. It's a kind of password, but specific for its use. So if you have application A, B, and C accessing your Dropbox files, each of them will have a different token, and they will not be using your username and password. Okay? Any questions so far? And this OAuth process, it has different flows. You see here that one flow is the one that I mentioned you. Log in with Google, ask Dropbox for files, give token to the application that is going to access Dropbox, and that's it. There are many OAuth flows, but I would like to summarize the two more important that if you use Sphinx, or you are going to use whatever is Sphinx, or whenever you use OAuth, it's client credentials and authorization code, all right, with PKCE. The authorization code is the regular one that you use for this process of logging in. So when you go to log into something, you have a mobile application, you have a desktop application or web application, you use this authorization code, which mainly is log in somewhere, get a code, after you log in, get the token, and with that token I can access my API. That's the authorization flow. The client credentials flow is even simpler. It's similar to user and password. I have user and password, go to the server, give me the token, right? The difference here is the authorization code usually involves a user and a login window, and the client credentials is usually used in the server side. So imagine that you have an XData server that goes to the Dropbox files. Okay, then you can use client credentials flow. It's hard for me to explain, but if you have any questions, let me know. Again, the OAuth, I gave some links here for you to play with OAuth. They are very nice links for you to understand the flows if you want to go to low level and learn about how the OAuth flow works. And then another concept we have is JSON Web Tokens. It's a completely different one. A JSON Web Token, who is familiar with JSON Web Token here? Okay, not many. A JSON Web Token is a kind of... let me show you what the JSON Web Token is instead of all this theory. I think it'll be clear. This is a JSON Web Token. Okay, text encoded in base 64. This is JSON encoded in base 64. So this is easily converted to JSON back and forth, no encryption, nothing here. It's just a regular conversion. So basically, the token means this JSON here. Okay, it's not JSON because we want the token to be sent through via URL or whatever. So in the JSON you have spaces, you have line breaks and things like that. So it's just a way to encode the JSON in a pure string way. Okay, and this JSON has meta information that you add here. You can have name, IT, you can have lots of information here in this JSON. Okay, so when you send a JSON Web Token to someone, that application or person can read the JSON that you have there. You have lots of information there. And what makes JSON Web Token different is that it has a signature part, which is this blue part here. This red part is this JSON, this purple part is this JSON, and this blue part is the signature. Okay? And the signature changes. You can see the JSON part is the same, but if you change the password, so to speak, or the secret, the signature changes. All right? So, if you receive a JSON Web Token like this, you can check if that token is valid by checking the signature, because you saw that the signature changed depending on the password. All right? So if I know the password, I can get the two parts in red and purple and calculate the signature and see if the signature that I calculated is the same that the one I received. If it is, I know that the person who created that JSON Web Token is my friend because he has the signature. Is that clear? So that's what makes it different, because when you authenticate, JSON Web Token is used for authentication. Remember that token that I told you? When I'm accessing an API, protected API, a JSON Web Token is one of the ways I can authenticate to it, and nowadays it's the most used one. I give the application the JSON Web Token as the password to authenticate. All right? So I want my customer, and here's the JSON Web Token for you to allow me to receive that. That server, your XData server, will receive a JSON Web Token and see if the signature matches. If it doesn't, forbidden. If it does, you see that the token is valid and you can proceed. You can trust any information that you have in the token. You can see that the name and the IAT, whatever information you have, it's valid, because if I change that information here, for example, if I steal this token and I want to access my, for example, I am John Doe and I want to get customer information about John, whatever, John Smith. I get this token and I change the JSON there, John Smith, and I send it to the server. The server will refuse because the signature changed. So I cannot change anything in the token without changing the signature. All right so far? So that's why JSON Web Tokens can be used to authenticate without you having to go to a database. Right? The usual thing we learn is that, okay, I receive a username and password. I go to my database and see if the password matches. Oh, the password matches, you are authenticated. This way you don't have to go anywhere to your database. You just receive a web token, calculate the signature, does it matches? Okay, authenticated. No need to use password. All right? So that's why it's being used a lot. I'll not speak about this part now. You don't have time. So let's try to illustrate this with some code. Now, answering your question, if I have an XData server and I want to protect it, I can add a JSON Web Token middleware to it. What does it do? Remember, the middleware, it will get a request and it will see if your requests have a JSON Web Token in it. All right? There is some configuration here, like forbid anonymous methods, which is not enabled by default, but for several reasons. But suppose that I do this. So if the request doesn't include a JSON Web Token, it will be rejected. All right? So with this, adding by this middleware and enable this, your server is protected. Nobody will access it without a JSON Web Token. All right? And then, or you can also come here to you can also come here to your endpoints and start adding some attributes like, okay, I want these endpoints to be public, but the create customer is protected. So doing this method will be available without a JSON Web Token, and this method will not be available unless the user sends a JSON Web Token. All right? And then you can start having a lot of combinations here. For example, you can have this method available for all customers if they are authenticated with the JSON Web Token, but you can have I don't even remember if that's the name. You can have this create customer here available only for those requests that include a JSON Web Token, but also inside the JSON of the token, they have to have a property scope with the name admin. To illustrate here, they have not only to have a web token, but they also have to do something like this. Okay, this is scope is not a standard also, but it's a common way for people to do authorization via roles. So it's a way for you to separate the roles of your application. So you have editor, you have admin, and things like that. So if the JSON includes here this, and scope is admin, it can create a customer. If it doesn't include admin, it can get a customer, but not create a customer. All right? So in your endpoints, you can start tuning the access to all your endpoints by setting this is public, this is private but only for administrators. And you have even options like this is private for administrations, and also if the JSON Web Token has a property called company name, and that company name has to be TMS, for example. So you can do that all from the attributes. Okay? So,
one question. If I have only one function who's open and the rest are with authorization, what can I do?
You can...
one is free.
You can forbid anonymous access. So this will make all your endpoints private. And then you can go here to the events and you say on forbid requests. All right. And then you can add some code here, like if URL is public / swagger or whatever, then forbid equals false. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So you can do a all or none, and then you can specifically allow or forbid.
Something like version. I have a server and the version is open for everyone and the rest is blocked.
Yes. Okay.
I believe I have to have a public method that tests the username and password and gives the web token to the...
That's it. For in your case, that's it.
Yeah, that's it.
That's it.
Enter username and password, I go to my database, yeah, you exist.
Generate the token.
Generate a token, here is your token. And then it starts sending it and asking for requests.
Yes.
Brilliant. Okay.
That's it. Okay? So far?
Okay, that's it.
So, so that's the workflow that he asked. So now, if you want to do a basic login, you have to do is generate your token somehow. Okay, so one side note, remember that we are talking about XData application. So it's different access to the API to login. Remember that an XData server is a bunch of endpoints that return JSON, right? Your actual application is something else. You have a mobile application, a web application, or a desktop application that is accessing XData API, but your application is a separate stuff. It has the views and the buttons and things like that. So the usual process is that when you're talking about login, that's why you have the client credentials. Imagine that you have some other software integrating with your XData server. All right? Suppose, for example, that you have an option create order or delete customer, and you have some automatic third-party server that is communicating with your XData API by creating orders, for example, for a different system. That software, do you agree with me that that software doesn't have a user involved? There's no user. It's just a background software that is creating orders in your application. That's where client credentials come. There is no login. That application will just get a token, and just with that token directly access your API. Somehow you give that application that token. I don't know how. Okay? A login is different. Then you have your user in your user interface wanting to log into your application that happens to communicate with XData. So your users go to a login page, you create a login page, or you go to a login page. Somehow they log in, they give password, they log in a way. Then they get the token, and your client application saves that token inside memory or wherever they want to save, and use that token to go to XData and do process for your user. Is that clear? Okay. So, to conclude, so if you want to create the flow yourself, what you have to do? Let's say a desktop application. Login. If you don't log in, you don't have a token. So suppose that you have a button and you click Get Customers. If you go to the XData server, you'll be forbidden. So your application, when you click Get Customers, you will receive an error saying unauthorized. All right? Of course, if you have your client application, you can do some nice messages like you have to log in, you don't have a token, etc. So if you want your user to log in, you have to create a login button. And in your XData server, you can create a public method, login, that you send information, you ask for username and password, you send information to that endpoint, and you implement that endpoint in a way that you get the username and password, go to your database where you have the list of your users and passwords, check if the password matches. If it does, create a token with the permissions that the user has. You saw that, you create a JSON with all the permissions. Create a token, give back to the client application, and from that on, the client application will use that token to communicate with XData. Okay? What does TMS Sphinx do? It gives that for you. That's the difference. You don't have to create that process of logging in, of creating a database with users and passwords. It creates that database with users and passwords for you. It creates the endpoints for you to log in. It creates the login page for you. It logs in the users for you and gives back your token to you. Okay? That's what it is. I'm showing you what it does in action. So in this example here, I have this API server, which is my XData server. Let me run, okay. Let me run the application so you see in action first. I have the XData server. I have the Sphinx server, which I put in a different application here. You have XData and Sphinx, but it can be in the same application. It's just separated here to illustrate. And then we have a VCL client. So I can do check login status, not logging in. If I do a login, I believe you saw this before, this kind of flow. You go to log into Google or whatever, okay, you can close your browser and things like that. So if I go back to the application, I'm logging in now. I have received the token from the Sphinx server, and now I can make a request to the XData server. Okay, and we have the equivalent here in the web client application. I try to fix that later if there's time. There's a web core application here which does the same. I'll get back to this and try to fix it if there's time. But this is just to show you how to log in from different types of applications. The VCL, the web core, which is the same application that I show in the VCL, and a mobile application. So the structure here is, I have the API server, which is the XData, which you are already expert in it after the sessions. So let me close off this. This is a different one. I put everything in the same form, so you have a dispatcher here and the XData server in the same form. All right. XData server, I have added the JSON Web Token middleware here. So if I try to access my XData without a token, I will be rejected. Okay. And I have my entities here. Right, it's different. It's publishing it's using Aurelius here, it's publishing the database. Anyway, the API server. And the Sphinx servers, we have the Sphinx server here, which is that API that logs in, that has that method login, all right? And we also have a database connection associated to Sphinx because it automatically creates the user database for you and other tables like users and tokens, whatever tables it needs to work correctly. And it creates a database for you and manage that for you. Let me see if I have some code here. Not much code. Yep, this code here is just creating the full users for the demo. That's why I have that hands, so it's creating some users for you. And here here is the part that you should learn more to use Sphinx. That relates to OData. Here's the part that I'm registering the applications that I will allow to access my XData server. Okay. I create my Sphinx server. It's everything ready out of the box. You saw that login page that I showed you, where I enter the username and password. That's Sphinx. That's you have automatically for you. That's what it does. It provides a login user page. You can create new users. You can register a new user. You have the option, forgot my password. I want to change the password. I want to confirm my email or confirm my phone number. So all this process are done for you. Not ready yet, but soon we have multi-factor authentication. We'll support passkeys, Apple passkeys. So this is all done for you in TMS Sphinx. All right. And then what you have to configure are the applications that are allowed to log in to your Sphinx. Remember that we are talking about single sign-on here. Sphinx is a different server than your API. It might be running in another part of the world. So what one doesn't know about the other. So the Sphinx application is just an application to authenticate. It's like Auth0 or Google. It's like login with Google. Okay. So this way, I tell Sphinx for which applications it can generate tokens. In this example, as I told you, we have a VCL application and a web application here. So those are the two applications that I have to register in Sphinx, so it's able to generate tokens for them. All right?
Is the table extendable?
Yes, yes. You can.
External coast ID and so on.
Yes, you can. Let me find the code here. That's another advantage of using Aurelius. Sphinx use Aurelius to save data in the database and create and things like that. So inside Sphinx there is a class named TUser with lots of properties that it needs to properly work and provide features for you. You can inherit from this TUser and say T, my company user, add lots of custom information, and it will use that for your Sphinx server. You can have that additional information for you. Okay. Where I was.
Wagner, is it possible to change the login screen itself?
You have an option here. There is this. Of course, this is a session for you to know about Sphinx. It's not a training. There is no time, but there is this Sphinx config component here that has lots of properties here for you to configure and etc. We can browse some of them here. For example, you have options for lockouts. I mean, you can define that if your user fails the password 5 times, it will be locked for a specific amount of time. You can say that if you need the email to be confirmed or not, if the emails has to be unique, because you can maybe log in with the email, or you want to use a username. Your application requires username. You have several options for passwords, and the UI option. You have you can say the default language that you want to use, for example. So the default is English, but you can just put it here, Portuguese or Deutsch or whatever, and the user interface will be automatically translated if the translation is available. For now we have Swedish, Portuguese, I'm not sure if there is German as well, but as long as Sphinx is getting more used, people will contribute, and we'll try to also help on that, so you can have the translations. And there is this login app folder, which is a low-level way of configuring it, where you put, you define a folder in your server where you're going to put files there to customize the login application. All right. The main file will be the CSS file. There is a default CSS custom Cascale, the CSS for the HTML applications that you can use to configure. It's very flexible. You can configure colors and even positions and lots of things for. So if you have a knowledge of CSS or you have a web designer, you can just completely modify the look and feel of the login page visually. All right. The login page is made with TMS Web Core, in case you are wondering. And there are some events here as well. So anyway, there is
for VCL application. Do I need a jump in the browser, or can I use a T-Web browser instead of a VCL?
You can use a T-Web browser. Actually, I think the example is ready for that. Let me check here.
I don't lose my user when he jumps.
Here.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, but this is not recommended. Okay, security-wise, even if you're in your mobile phone, you see disclaimer in Google or Facebook, especially Google, they say don't use embed browsers in your mobile application or your VCL applications. Always use the default system browser to log in, because it's more secure, and also your users will feel more secure because they can see, I mean, where is this coming from? Is this from login.myserver.com, or is this coming from some fake sites? So users can tell about it. So it's a security recommendation that all this login process go through the system browser. Okay, but there is an option here. Any questions so far? Really? All right. Let me see if I can fix this web client here. Good. I think I'd mess it up with TMS build. Okay, so here's the web core application that logs in the same way. Of course, this is for learning purpose, but ideally you open your web application and you go directly to the login page instead of showing here. But just to show the code, so check login status, users is logged in, login, it goes to your Sphinx server, and you do the same process. Okay, and then you have the information, you have your access token, ID token, and things like that. All right. Nuvem Fiscal is using TMS Sphinx. This is besides this web page here, and the application pages are built with web core. The authentication is built with Sphinx, and of course the API is built with XData. So it's in Portuguese, but you see here it's just a regular SaaS server. If you see here, comece grátis means start free now. Okay, so users can just come here, and you can do that if you want. You can go there and create an account. Right. So you asked it about the login page. It's of course it's the same style, but we added some logo and things like that. It's in Portuguese, so it's translated also. So I can either log in, or here it's written you don't have an account to register now. Okay, so I can register and type my email, define a password. And in this case, if I create an account, it will send a token for me to verify my email. Okay, so it's only create an account if I verify it here. And so this is all built in, resend code and things like that. And of course, I have an account here, and I can enter. I can log in. So if you have a simple authentication scheme, you can do it yourself, but Sphinx helps you out if you have these kind of needs. either a public SaaS or you have a complex authentication process that you want to give our customers a single login. That's what Sphinx is for. I believe you had that question, what do I use Sphinx for? That's its purpose. And just out of curiosity for you, this is the SaaS, the API. Let me. So this part is web core, TMS web core, okay? And I'll translate it for you. I'm logged in here. In this case, this is an API. So here I'm creating API credentials. So I create an account. I confirm my email. I come here. And I want to access the API. Remember that zip code, for example, I want my applications to get a zip code and get an address. So I create a credential here. Production or sandbox. So I want to create and it creates a client ID and client secret. This is the client credentials. Okay. So with this information here, I have to delete because this is valid one. With this information, I go to my Sphinx server, send the client ID and client credentials, get the token, and then I can access the API. Okay?
The client secret, was this the token? This token? Your client secret we saw here, was this the token you are using for further?
No, I use the client secret to go to Sphinx server and ask for a token. That's the OAuth client credential flow. Okay. And then I exclude not that. What else here we have?
The client ID is in the JSON token.
No. This is OAuth flow. Because the token, the JSON Web Token, has an expiration information. Usually it comes with an expiration, meaning that your token is valid until tomorrow or for the next hour. So usually the token doesn't last forever for security issues, because if your token is stolen, someone cannot use it forever. It will work only for an amount of time. So in this case, we cannot provide tokens directly to the users.
The client ID is in token information?
No. The client ID and client secret are just opaque tokens. They don't have any information there. They're a kind of username and password that you have to protect this. That's why it is machine to machine. Usually, users will get this client ID and client secret, save in their servers, where they might have an XData server for their application. And in that server, they use this client ID and client secret to go to a Sphinx server, get a token that works for the next hour or next day, and then communicate with the API to do the Brazilian government documents, all right? And then after some time, that token will expire, and the server, you have to use the client ID again to get a new token to continue working, okay? So this process of using a client ID and secret to get the token is the OAuth flow. It's one of the OAuth flow that's recommended for this kind of machine-to-machine communication.
You can put information in the token, names and something else.
I know.
Yeah, but we saw it is a user. The client ID is the user name. And,
kind of username.
Yeah, and you get a password, and this information you stored in your Aurelius tables you showed 10 minutes before on your sync.
No. Yeah, it's complex. Sorry, Bruno?
Yes.
Okay. That's why security is complex. Here is.
Can you do multi-tenant with Sphinx?
Yes. This is multi-tenant, right? Because You create an account there. Okay. This client ID and secret, you are developing an application, your application, A. This application is hiring this service here, all right? Your application wants to use this API to add features to it. So you are creating an account here. You are creating credentials, client ID and secrets, that you get and put in your application internally, as much protected as you can, ideally not available in a mobile or desktop application, ideally only on your server, so that when needed, when your clients communicate with your application gets this client ID and secrets, asks for a token to use this API.
I have to store it and you have to store it on your side, on the Sphinx side.
On Sphinx side, it stores inside those tables. Okay, that's what you're...
Same procedure. I have to store it and you have to store it.
Yes.
And we saw in your code the Aurelius tables. This was my question.
Yeah.
Store this in your Aurelius tables.
Yes.
Okay.
Just for curiosity, you store in your table, you store the client secret. I don't store the client secret here. Just for your curiosity. That's why if you are user tool, you say load credentials, and the user, this kind of application say to you, this is the only time you can see your client secrets, not anymore, because we don't, Sphinx server, we don't save the client secret in the database. We save a hash, so it cannot be used anymore. So we save a hash, you save the secret, that's why I have to protect you. So when you ask for a token, you send the secret, we check if it matches the hash, and give you the token. Yeah, it's a mess.
I've made a one-time token, and I don't know what's the best way. I've an expiration time of 15 seconds, but it's not good. Have you a solution for make a one-time token?
What do you mean by one-time token?
One time I use it, and after the use, it's...
you don't want to allow users to reuse the token?
Yes, a one-time token.
In this case, you have to have some storage server-side, and maybe JSON Web Token is not the case, or you can use it, but you still have to have some ID for the token that you have to check in your database or in your files or in your Redis or whatever cache you have, that token was reused. There is no way to invalidate a JSON Web Token, unfortunately. Yes. Any more questions? All right. Thank you.